Building the Future, Green Building in the New Millennium, brought to you by Sustainable Homes of the Future. Our natural world is in crisis. Buildings emit 40% of carbon globally. We need solutions now. Join the conversation today. Welcome back to the podcast, friends. This is Building the Future, where we explore how to use innovative thinking, systems, and technology to lead the building industry toward a more sustainable future and a safer, healthier planet. My name is Ian Sollenberger, and today Ginger Matthews and I will be tackling the exciting and daunting topic of sustainable architecture. We're going to discuss both the philosophical and the practical reasons why we think it's better to design buildings with a holistic, dare I say, spiritual approach, using some examples from one of our single-family designs. And we will also talk about a few design ideas that you might consider to achieve a higher level of sustainability in larger mixed-use buildings, where the rewards can be so much greater. Welcome, Ginger. Can you catch anybody up who missed our first two episodes?
Thank you, Ian. Welcome, listeners. If you're just tuning into the podcast, we've used the first two episodes to talk you through how any project team, big or small, can design a better performing, more efficient building by holding a design charrette, and using the integrative design process to approach site analysis and research. So take a listen.
I am personally excited for today's episode because this is where our green concepts really start to come together in design. Looking at architecture through the lens of sustainability really highlights the potential for a brand new kind of development, one that celebrates form and function and shows that designing with our environment in mind can really have a huge impact. So I'm excited.
We advocate for our listeners to keep sustainability at the forefront because sustainable green building really does mean durability, which is the most eco-friendly way to design a building intended to last for 100 years. That's the goal. So let's kick off with the question, Ian. Do you really need a sustainable architect in order to have a sustainable project?
Good question. Clearly, you can't have a building without an architect, and you certainly can't have a sustainable building without sustainable systems, green methods, and materials. So at the very least, you need an architect that is open to approaching the building design with a green design and sustainability in mind. There are sustainable architecture firms out there doing this for sure, but I think that it's possible to work with some that aren't as familiar with the concepts if you have a design manager with a track record of pushing for sustainable design. In our discussions with clients and investors and developers here in Los Angeles, we've really discovered that the main thing that's holding the industry back from incorporating more sustainability features into their projects is this misconception that anything new is risky and costly.
But fortunately, there's a green building revolution happening right now, definitely spurred on by technology and innovation at home and abroad. So we in the building space need to convince our clients to harness that wave and ride it to the future. So today's conversation really sets the stage for more detailed conversations later in the season about cost-saving measures and lowering our carbon footprint through energy and water management, battery storage, and other green technologies. Very exciting.
It is. It's time to utilize these design methods, materials, energy, and development practices that enhance the surrounding ecosystem and communities, not cause them harm. It's a concept that is called triple bottom line accounting, where you take into account people and planet as well as profit. I know we've said that before. We're going to continue saying it every episode, probably.
Yes, we will.
And our design model, it's based on the knowledge and the experience that if you bring sustainability into the conversation early enough in the process, there are strategies to save money during construction. Imagine that, and end up with a less environmentally costly building at the end, something that everybody can be proud of.
Ian, can you tell us what's so different about a sustainable architecture compared to traditional architecture?
I certainly can try. Conceptually, sustainable architecture boils down to taking the building's full context, past, present, and future, most importantly, future, into consideration when approaching the design. It sounds a little out there, like, but what do you mean the context? But let me break it down. We've talked quite a bit about the design charrette and getting the whole project team together at the outset to get everyone on board and analyze the specific site. And obviously, the more thorough we can be with that analysis, the better, because it helps us to be really clear on our objective context. What I mean by that is the what and the where. What was this? What did this site used to be? What is it right now? What's there on it right now? But at that point, it's normally up to the architect to take that, those parameters, and figure out how to turn it into a decent looking building. And perhaps you get lucky. You happen to nab one of the few architects out there that happens to be constantly thinking about durability and resilience in design. There are some. But if you don't, manage to snag one of those folks, then that's pretty much where the push towards sustainability generally ends. And what I want to talk about now, Ginger, is some of the sustainability studies that you performed, and the design concepts that you considered when designing your first single family property, because I think that'll be a good jumping off point to then talk about some of these bigger buildings and the bigger impact that they can have.
Mm-hmm. Sure. We used really a number of passive strategies, as much as we possibly could, such as considering the sun orientation, climate. We were also thoughtful about window placement, operation to best manage daylighting and natural ventilation, all of which goes a long way in reducing energy requirements for the building.
Mm-hmm.
So one goal was analyzing how big a solar array would be required to operate the home for the entire year, which we call net zero. Zero energy consumed from the grid, basically.
That's
Concept.
awesome. Yeah.
That's where the building is generating enough energy to power itself over a whole year's time. So we're talking a lot more about that concept in our energy episodes, so stay tuned. But to make net zero energy happen on our project, we also had to have a design battery storage. We had to design that to avoid the energy grid interruptions and potential blackouts.
Yeah. You have to think not only about how much you're going to, as you mentioned, like the loads, the energy loads, but then also what happens if it's, not sunny for 20 days in a row, right? Like, how are we going to store that? That's cool. And I understand, from talking to you and the architect, that your architect was insistent on sealing the envelope as much as possible, and that you guys actually studied thermal mass, which is a cool concept that can be used to harness, again, that solar energy, almost like a battery. Thermal mass is these thick walls or floors made of organic materials that can actually absorb heat from the sun during the day and then release it into the building at night. And that also reduces energy needs. So kudos to you guys for going that far. That's pretty neat.
Thank you.
And it's interesting to note too that, like, specific climate considerations might actually require less insulation and opt for more airflow, depending on what climate zone you're in. I mean, obviously we were in California, but even within California, there's these microclimate situations. So, that's really what it takes. You have to think about that whole scope and that full context of the building when thinking about the design. I know you guys used other strategies to lessen the environmental impact of the build. Can you talk about some of those?
Well, we really put a lot of thought into sustainable materials. So we made that a priority. We purchased steel, lumber, concrete finishing materials such as carpet and furnishings locally as possible, and as close by as possible, because to eliminate transportation overload. And so we elected to buy from companies that use environmentally responsible manufacturing techniques, recycled materials. So really, that's what sustainability is all about.
Yeah, that's really important to consider in any kind of building design, because It makes me think of the nose to tail or the slow food movement. I'm a big
Hmm.
foodie. I know you and your daughter are as well. And one of
Hmm.
the big things is you use products that are regionally and sustainably manufactured, because that lessens the environmental impact, and actually it can bring down cost as well, because you're
Absolutely.
not having to transport it from Maine or whatever, which is very costly for both the environment and for the pocketbook. Um, did you bring in any other experts to help you with your design, other than obviously the architect?
Yes, yes. We met with an interior architectural designer.
Hmm,
So th- she analyzed the spaces, the layout of the rooms, the flow from one area of the house to the other. Simplifying the spaces certainly helped us with our sustainability goals because it reduced the need for excess building materials.
cool.
And we brought in an automation expert, believe it or not, because we wanted to design a fully integrated computer system to assist with energy and water management, shades, window lighting, all with the objective of lowering costs and reducing energy needs over the long term. So building automation is still a relatively new field. So we as sustainability consultants benefit from being up to speed on the most recent systems available.
That sounds really exciting. I mean, and speaking of technology, I know you guys also used like modeling tools like SketchUp, and I know there are folks out there using like virtual reality programs to almost be able to walk the space and see what it will feel like inside before you get too far with the design. Um, and as you just mentioned, there are some of these next level automation technologies out there to not only track and manage these various systems, these house systems or building systems, but to make the energy to make sure the building is as energy efficient as possible, and actually monitor that stuff so you have the data in front of you. And the objective is obviously to make it easy to have a highly efficient building, which then saves money over the long run. A great thing. Um, Ginger, why is sustainable architecture even more important to think about for somebody designing a bigger building, low income housing, multifamily, office, or mixed use development, for instance? Can you speak to that?
Oh, it really comes down to bigger project, bigger environmental and community impact.
Hmm.
So as we mentioned before, it's necessary and certainly often required by city and state to consider neighborhood impact in any sustainable development or design. But the more people interacting with the building, the more important all these sustainable strategies really become. So, Ian, what are some of the other emerging architectural design strategies for improving the health of both people and planet when it comes to these larger mixed use developments?
Great question. And interestingly enough, other people are asking it as well, because there's actually a building certification program that exists now called WELL, WELL, and that actually focuses specifically. It's funny. I actually thought when I heard that for the first time that it had to do with water, because I thought it was like talking about a well in the ground, but that is not the
Mm-hmm.
case. Um, but it focuses on the health and well-being, and that's where the well comes from, of a building's occupants and its surrounding community. So taking some of those ideas from LEED and Living Building Challenge, where you're taking the environmental and the community context into consideration, and then really amping it up and focusing specifically on that. um, but our question is always, as design folks, how do we get there? So I want to just briefly mention an exciting field in architecture that sort of came from organic architecture, way back in the Frank Lloyd Wright days, and has now become or is termed biophilic design. And that really asks, how can we use design to increase a building and then therefore the occupants' connectivity to nature? Um, Studies have shown that reflecting nature in design and giving that connectivity to its occupants using certain light, certain colors, even certain shapes and materials can increase worker and tenant satisfaction. It can increase productivity if you're talking about an office. It can elevate mood if you're talking about a residential building. So in this case, interestingly enough, we talked a little bit about form and function earlier, and the form follows function cliche. Well, in this case, function really ends up following form rather than the other way around. I think that's interesting.
Studies have also shown using bio-based materials like wood, hemp, clay can also lead to a healthier indoor environment, which begs the question, why aren't we doing hempcrete instead of concrete right now?
Well, the two biggest issues are probably budget. It takes a team of pretty experienced people in hempcrete in order to pack the hempcrete. It's not something that, concrete, obviously everybody knows how to do. Like that's just the standard. So some of these things are a little outside the norm. Budget might be an issue. Structural issues, trying to lessen materials. Again, there's always kind of a cost benefit analysis where hempcrete requires that you have wider walls in order to deal with that organic material. So, maybe if you're trying to lessen your impact, those are the sort of decisions that you have to make. Do we want wider walls and therefore we're going to be using more wood on this project? Or are we so, focused on hempcrete that we're going to do that and we'll figure out how to deal with the wide walls? I mentioned earlier, it's possible that the best strategy for one project could be better insulation, using hempcrete or something like that, while for another, maybe eliminating square footage, reorienting the building to face a different direction is the only thing that we need to help us achieve higher efficiency. So those are all the considerations.
Interesting, very interesting. So yes, bottom line is we need to be really creative and nimble in the approach.
Indeed.
So when we hand things over to the architect, we need to be sure we're very clear why sustainability matters in the project. So it's not one size fits all, not at all. Sustainability, like architecture, is itself an artistic endeavor.
I agree, very much so.
Discipline, very much a discipline.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, our sustainability goals, for our project, which maybe an average developer might refer to as more subjective, perhaps, minimal impact, interior flow, use of space and light, comfort and convenience, even color. These are things that allow us to synthesize our environmental and our aesthetic goals with the budgetary parameters and ask the question, where are there opportunities for us to kill multiple birds with the same stone? And that's where the artistry of it comes in. I'm curious, with all the low quality builds that we see out there, Ginger, on the regular, do you think it's possible to design something that's beautiful, sustainable, and profitable?
Absolutely. We know that it's possible. There are many multifamily developments as well as single family homes in LA that have achieved the LEED Platinum Net Zero certification. So it's being done all over town.
Yeah.
Here in Southern California anyway. So in fact, the newly opened City Services building here in Santa Monica achieved a Living Building Challenge certification, which is, I believe it's the most difficult one to achieve. Certification out there. So it's in depth. So no redless materials, ultra efficient systems, healthy, safe working conditions for everyone on the project. Certainly the city of Santa Monica is at the forefront for sure.
Yeah, the biggest difference between some of the other certifications and the Living Building Challenge is that safe working conditions for everybody on the project. There are no other certifications really where that's a focal point. So it is very hard to achieve. And I'm actually hoping to have the design manager for that project in for an interview one of these days. She shared with me a study that the city of Santa Monica did to prove that the upfront cost was only, or the overall cost, was only 2 to 5% more for that project. And they really have to get that Living Building Challenge certification. And they have really some truly next level systems. One of them is foam flush toilets or composting toilets. And I think that she said their payback period for the additional upfront cost was only a couple years based on the projections for the money that they would save on operating costs. So, most projects aren't going to go that far, but with each one that does, we actually prove to everybody else in the industry that these aren't pie in the sky ideas. they're groundbreaking innovations that can be used to design and build better buildings. Little anecdote, she told me that in the process, this was the first building that was going to be doing this foam flush toilet thing. And so everybody, in the county of LA, everybody was basically like, is that really the best idea? And so they sent somebody from the county of LA up to the Bullitt Center in Seattle, which is the only other building that I know of that has these already. And when they came back, they basically not only greenlighted this particular project in Santa Monica, but now they're recommending for municipal buildings across the county, schools, large scale developments like that. They're recommending these foam flush toilets. I think that's pretty cool that, you have somebody who just sees it one time and says, yeah, you're right. You're right. I get it. Do you have any examples of other groundbreaking innovations that you think have the potential to shake up the industry, Ginger?
Our current mixed-use design project here in Santa Monica is considering an automated parking deck. Now, that may be news to a lot of people, that could be an environmental project. So it's computerized valet parking, basically. So that means you'll pull up to the building and it will just take it from there. So it's actually very convenient for the users as well. But it means more parking spaces with less excavation. So you also, obviously, a cost-cutting measure there. So no need to heat, cool the garage, less energy usage, fewer emissions, and less cost. Obviously, you don't have to go down 3 or 4 levels. You can just stick with one. Something like that could really make your building stand out. Certainly, multifamilies, are competing with each other as well, especially here in Southern California. So rental candidates will look at that and really see that as a thumbs up. So significant sustainability elements as well, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, it'll be fun someday. Sustainability, I think in the very near future will actually be seen as an amenity. If we haven't crossed that line already, we're close.
I like that.
Yeah. And lots of great benefits out there for not only health, but for the environment, as we said. And you're saving money by digging less. That's great. Speaking of financial considerations in real estate and development, it's interesting. People don't realize that most current appraisals do not include any of the green and energy efficient components of a home or a building. Can we speak to that a little bit?
There needs to be a recognized method of capturing the monetary value of these features that we're putting into our sustainable buildings in order to see this higher value right up front in the appraisal. And that expands awareness for green homes. So hopefully that's going to be coming online very soon.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I just read about an initiative by the Appraisal Institute that's really starting to gain momentum in the last couple of years. They put out not only the recommendation of how to do it, but sort of a cheat sheet of like, hey, these are the things to focus on. And so they're trying to incorporate that in. And, appraisers are really the nexus or the middleman, if you will, between lending and construction and sales and sort of the real estate industry. Everybody's racing to catch up at this point with some of these lenders who've recognized that these green features actually need to be accounted for. They've seen the bottom line. They've seen the financials on some of these buildings and operating costs and, all of that and construction costs. And they're saying, and the value piece on the back end too, they're seeing that. And so they're actually, wanting others in the industry to come along. Obviously there's so much more to talk about. We could go on forever, but I think we've done a pretty good job today of laying out the broad strokes. So what's next? What are we looking for in our next episode, Ginger?
Well, in our next episode, we're going to be covering sustainable landscape design, which then will carry us on to overviews of both energy and water management. So stay tuned for those.
Fantastic. As always, not as always, but for now, we're just getting our podcast off the ground here, episode 3. So tell your friends, please share the link, contribute if you'd like, just listen, whatever you feel inclined to do. And if you would like to reach out, please email me directly at info@shfbuild.com. This was super fun. Thank you, Ginger.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, listeners.
Yes. Thank you, fellow green building enthusiasts, for joining us once again at the Building the Future podcast. Until next time, make sure your sustainability goals are clearly defined and communicated to the entire team, even the architect, from the beginning. And whatever the idea, don't let anyone tell you it can't be done. Until next time.
Thank you.
Building the Future, Green Building in the New Millennium, brought to you by Sustainable Homes of the Future.